One of John Harbaugh's biggest challenges in restoring Big Blue pride in the New York Giants is going to include having to eliminate four potential roadblocks. What are they? Locked On Giants starts right now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, now the number one sports podcast network in America. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, a welcome to our everyday Dayer Club members, our Blue Crew community members, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Giant fans, in case you were wondering, nope, you weren't dreaming. John Harbaugh signed on the dotted line. He did so over the weekend. He is officially the head coach of the New York Giants. The easy part, and I'm referring to obviously the hiring of him and getting the contract done, that's done now. The hard part is still to come. So on today's show, in the first segment, we're going to talk about the four things that John Harbaugh has to get rid of in the Giants organizations, particularly in the locker room. There's four things, and I'll give you a little bit of background on each and some examples of how they have sabotaged the Giants over the years. Then in segment two, do the Giants need to reload or rebuild? We'll explore that question and just take a look at just how good the core that the Giants keep saying that they have, how good is it really? All right. And then finally, in segment three, who should the Giants get for their coordinators? I mean, now that Harbaugh is in the fold, the coordinators is going to be a big, big question. And already, we have some names that have been floated out. I'll talk about those, but I'll give you my take on what I would like to see the Giants do. And I'll tell you why. I have a specific thing in mind that I'll share with you in segment three. So that is our list of topics for today. Again, welcome to everybody. All right, let's take a look at the four things or four challenges that John Harbaugh has to get rid of in order to get the Giants back on track. Now, a little background for you. There was a clip that resurfaced on X, formerly known as Twitter, of Harbaugh speaking at, it was some kind of civic event down for Baltimore. And I think it was for the Baltimore Chamber of Commerce. I think, and if I remember correctly, the event was in 2017. And in that clip, Harbaugh mentioned four things that can sabotage any team, whether it be a sports team, a business team, or a civics team, whatever. And in looking at those four things that he mentioned, you could pretty much say that they have affected the Giants, particularly recent years. All right. The Giants really not on track, haven't been on track since, in a long time. I mean, only 2 playoff appearances since 2016, and they've got some work to do. So I'm going to go through the four things that Harbaugh mentioned and give you examples of from the Giants' recent seasons of how that sabotage or potentially sabotage the efforts. All right, so let's get into it. The first thing that Harbaugh mentioned was division within. All right. So basically splintering up the locker room instead of an all for one and one for all front. You have gossip, you have backbiting, you have complaining, you have all kinds of little whispers going on that sabotage team unity. All right. Now, where have we seen this with the Giants? Well, remember back in 2024, after the blowout loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, what happened? You had Dexter Lawrence and Malik Neighbors calling the effort soft, right? They didn't come right out and call teammates soft. They called the effort soft. So that's something that maybe shouldn't have been mentioned because who was giving the effort that was so soft? It was the teammates, right? So that got out. And of course, that made all kinds of headlines. And that was not a good thing. And then, you also had in 2025, after the Giants got blown out by the Detroit Lions, Malik Neighbors, in a tweet that he put out that was deleted almost as quickly as he put it out, questioned the play calling. All right. So basically, you can't have that within. I mean, if guys are going to have an opinion, which they will, you don't put that out and air that dirty laundry out. Because the minute you do that, it gives off the impression that the team is not unified, that there's a problem, a cultural problem, and it's just not a good look. So Harbaugh's point is, look, if you got issues, you try and solve them within. You don't take them to the public because that's the quickest way for, the media and the fan base to start to panic and say, oh my gosh, this guy's got to go, that guy's got to go, and so on and so forth. So that's number one. Number two, the number two force that Harbaugh mentioned is us versus them. Now, you are never going to win. If you're a pro team, you are never going to win a war of words with the fan base. The fan base is your paying customer group. They are the ones who are buying the tickets, buying the TV packages, buying the merchandise, all the stuff that ultimately goes into your pocket. So to pick a fight with them over, whatever, not the smartest move. All right. Now, we saw that not too long ago with the Giants. Specifically, Evan Neal, who is on his way out, by the way, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. He will not be back with the Giants. He unwisely decided to make it an us versus them fight with the fans. The famous burger flipping comment that he made, but more specifically, Evan Neal took exception to the fact that Giant fans were booing the team off the field when they were putting out a lousy product, which, by the way, was the Giant fans' right to do. I mean, if they're paying good money to sit and watch football for 3 hours, they expect a good product. And if they don't get it, they deserve to boo the team off the field, which something Evan Neal didn't quite grasp. So he decided to vent out of frustration and make it an us versus them type of situation. You will never win that one. Never. You will never win a battle with your paying customers if you go out and you criticize them and say, oh, instead of booing us, you should support us regardless. No, not going to happen. All right. So that's the best type of example I can come up with for that one. Then Harbaugh also mentioned in his speech to the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, fatigue. Now, this can come in two different forms as I see it. You could look at physical fatigue and mental fatigue. All right. So there were actually two examples, or I should say one example of each. Physical fatigue, I look at the fourth quarter collapses that dotted the season this past year. All right. You've got to be able to finish out. So whether you're tired, whether you're playing 80 plays, in a game, whatever the case may be, you've got to finish it out. And if you're not, then, yes, part of it might have been play calling, part of it might have been execution. But if the execution was sloppy, was that because there was fatigue? You could make that argument for sure. Was the play calling altered because the coach thought that maybe the team was getting tired? Possibly. You can make that argument as well if you want to. But the bottom line is that fatigue can play a factor in, a team's culture just going down the toilet. Now, there's another form of fatigue, and that's called the loser's mentality, which basically, when you continue to lose week after week after week, you kind of start to believe that you're a loser. Without really acknowledging it, it kind of seeps into your subconscious, and that's something you have to try to avoid. So, for example, I look at Deonte Banks. I think he's really, a good example of this. Deonte Banks, whenever he would get beaten or screw up a play, he would sulk and his confidence would drop. And as a result, the effort would drop. And, we all remember how in 2024 against Pittsburgh, he was famously benched for a lousy effort. All right. So that was a really good example of individual, that loser mentality, fatigue, where, you get beat and your confidence goes out the window. And you just can't have that if you want to have a winning team. All right. And then the final thing that Harbaugh mentioned in that speech was complacency. Now, that, not so much in the locker room, this is more of an organizational issue as I see it. We talk about, or we hear from Joe Shane, the coaches, the players, we have processes. We're going to stick to our process. Okay, how many wins has your process gotten you the last 3 seasons, right? So after a while, you said to yourself, okay, look, guys, your processes aren't working. When are you going to change them? When are you going to sit back and say, gee, maybe it's not what we're seeing on the field so much as is how we're setting things up for what's being seen on the field. So, you look at the Giants way, and they've only had 2 winning seasons since 2016. That's not good enough. All right. We're now in 2026. So what? That's almost 10 years, over 10 years. That's not good enough. And you have to change your process. Your processes have to evolve with the times and the challenges. And the Giants have not done a good job of that at all. All right. So Harbaugh, who in coming in, in an interview he did with SI.com and also with The Athletic, talked about how, there are things that they want to build out further, which means some of the processes are probably going to change, whether it be reporting structures, whether it be how they, evaluate personnel, whatever the case may be. We don't know the details just yet. So Harbaugh is, that was one of the sticking points allegedly in his contract talks with the Giants. So those are the 4 things that Harbaugh, a culture setter, is going to try, I would assume, to get rid of in the Giants organization. And hopefully moving forward, we won't have incidents where guys challenge the fans or, fatigue or, us versus them, but, splintering up the locker room. If they can do that, they have a fighting chance to get back on schedule. If they can't, then this whole thing will have been for naught. All right. Speaking of which, folks, coming up next, do the Giants need to reload or rebuild? We'll discuss that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, if you've ever wished to become a pro quarterback and get drafted first overall, now you can with Ultimate QB Football Legend. In this game, you step into the cleats of a number 1 draft pick quarterback, and it's your job to lead your team to greatness, to help turn a failing franchise into a dynasty. This is the number 1 quarterback career mode game on the mobile app stores, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control. You sign contracts, you train and upgrade yourself, you build chemistry and evolve your teammates, give your input to your GM on roster moves, play the actual game in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. Ultimate QB is totally free to play, has no ads, and works 100% offline. So it's perfect for when you want to sneak in a quick game or 2 on the go. Just head on over to ultimate-qb.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search for Ultimate QB in your app store. And we've got something a little special for you. Use our promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game store to get a free boost at the start of your career. Ultimate QB Football Legend QB, it is your legacy. Hey, Giant fans, the big game is almost here, and there's no better way to stay locked into every moment than with Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where it is always good to be right. Prize Picks makes watching the game even more exciting by letting you build simple lineups around player projections. No drafts, no waiting, just football action all the way through the playoffs. Just pick 2 or more players and choose more or less on their projections. It makes watching games way more engaging and is a great way to keep playing fantasy football even after season-long leagues are done. Their early payouts let you cash out if a player gets off to a hot start, and you can mix in stars from different teams and build lineups that fit how you watch the game. Download the Price Picks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Price Picks, it's good to be right. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up this week on Tuesday, John Harbaugh's introductory press conference. I will be there. And there's usually like little side press conferences that go on at these events. So sometimes you'll go up in a huddle with, team ownership, for example, or the GM. So I will have a wrap up for you. I'll get that together just as soon as I humanly can. Also on Tuesday, the Giants Squad Show. We're going to be coming to you live on a live stream at a special time on Tuesday. We're going to do it at 7 p.m. Eastern. So it'll be Jay Berman, myself, Mark Collins. We'll talk about the day's events, what was said, the hiring of Harbaugh, where they go to next, all great stuff. So hopefully you will check that out. And that live stream will, of course, be on the Locked On Giants YouTube channel. So do check that out. All right. Let's get into the next segment. Do the Giants need to reload or rebuild? Now, depending on your definition, you would say, okay, the team has not done very well. It's won, 7 games over the last 2 seasons. You would probably say it's time to rebuild. All right. And usually when a head coach comes in, that's what ends up happening anyway. He comes in and he gets rid of guys that maybe don't fit or his idea of the culture, or he replaces them with his own guys. And I fully expect John Harbaugh is going to bring with him some former Ravens or Ravens players who will be former Ravens, I should say. It always reminds me of when you open a franchise and corporate sends down corporate trainers to make sure that the franchise gets off to the right on the right foot. So that's kind of what I anticipate will happen with the Giants. Now, that being said, you look at the core of this team, and they do have a pretty strong core. All right. You've got, Jackson Dart. You've got Cam Scatteraboo, Tyrone Tracy, Theo Johnson, Malik Neighbors. You've got Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau. You've got Andrew Thomas on the offensive line, John Michael Schmitz. You've got Paulson Adebo, Javon Holland, Darius Alexander on the defensive line. So you've got a lot of young core pieces that you can build around. It's just a matter of building it up. So think of it in terms of reloading. Now, obviously, we know that the Giants, they need to add another receiver. All right. They were just exposed in terms of receiver depth when Malik Neighbors went down with its injury. So they're going to have to reload a little bit there. They're going to probably need to add another tight end because Daniel Bellinger and Chris Manhertz, both unrestricted free agents. I don't know if both will be back. I'm hoping Bellinger is back, but I don't know that he will be. Right. So you've got to add there. You want to add some young pieces in the cup to put in the cupboard at offensive line and defensive line. Always a good idea to stock up there. Really, the only position I would say they probably need to rebuild is inside linebacker. And again, that depends on what they do with Bobby Okereke. I do think they're going to retain Okereke. If you had asked me that maybe, halfway through the season, I would have said, I don't think he's going to be back because he's going to be a cap hit. I think he does come back, but he's also in the final year of his contract. So you want to put some depth at that position because that was a problem last year, especially after Micah McFadden, who, by the way, is also an unrestricted free agent after he went down. So that's really the only position I would say that the Giants need to just do a total overhaul. They do have talent at every spot. You could also make the case that they need a little bit more at cornerback, which I would agree with. All right. Deonte Banks has shown he can't be a cornerback, although who knows, maybe under Harbaugh and whoever Harbaugh brings in as a defensive backs coach, maybe that changes. But they need some more depth, obviously. They need players. And this is where, Harbaugh's going to come into play. He's going to take what already exists and mix in acquisitions that fit what he and his coordinators ultimately are looking for. All right. So, for example, I know a lot of people when Harbaugh was signed, sealed, and delivered, they're like, they got to go for the safety in the draft. Well, if you had said to me, if that had been any other coach, I would have said, nah, they're not going to go safety first round in the draft. Now, I'm not so sure. Now, why not? Go for best player available. And, that's kind of an advantage that Harbaugh brings to the table. Not being, an offensive minded guy or a defensive minded guy. He's more inclined, I think, to maybe be a little bit more open minded into not assigning positional value into the players that are brought onto the roster, which, I hope is the case, because all too often we can go back and we can say, oh, it looked like the Giants put a little too much more positional value on this spot versus that spot. And it was that spot that came back to bite the Giants. So overall, folks, I don't think the Giants need to tear this thing down. They've got a good young core. They just have to build it up. And oh, by the way, coaching is going to be so important. That was really the whole premise of, getting rid of Brian Dable and most of the assistants that he had, which I don't anticipate those folks to be back. They are going to meet the assistant coaches that remain. They're going to meet with Harbaugh on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they're going to be, a feeling out process. Does Harbaugh want them? If so, do they want to stick around? So we'll see how that works out. But yeah, they've got a solid foundation. They don't need to tear it down. They need to build on it. And that's the big difference as to why this Giant team can conceivably turn it around quickly with the right pieces and with a little luck from the injury bug. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, speaking of coaches, coordinators. Let's talk coordinators for the Giants. That's coming right after this. Hey, Giant fans, the NFL playoffs are here, and every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Right now on NFL Playoff Game Day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. It's loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to the bets you like most. The boosts let you lean into your game day instincts, whether you're backing momentum, defense, quarterback play, or coaching. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And before we get into this final segment, thank you again for making the Locked On Giants podcast part of your day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you're a true diehard New York Giants fan, check out our Everyday or All Access tier. You'll get one-on-one text access with me, all access episodes, an exclusive newsletter, a 15% discount to the Locked On merch store, regular video calls with me, and a whole lot more. And trust me, folks, there's going to be so much coming in the coming weeks with my everydayers and my Blue Crew community members. So head on over to LockedOnNYGiants.supercast.com to join the Everydayer program and unlock all access. You can also find the link in the show notes. All right, Giant fans, in this segment, let's talk coordinators. Now, we already have heard that Todd Monken is tied into the offensive coordinator spot. But interestingly enough, Todd Monken is also being considered as a head coaching candidate for the Cleveland Browns. It was reported that he's getting a second interview, this time an in-person interview with Cleveland. I'd be surprised if he gets that role, to be honest with you, but you can't rule it out, obviously. I believe Monken also got interest from Tampa Bay for their offensive coordinator position. So it sounds like Monken is going to be the first choice for John Harbaugh as the offensive coordinator. But let's say, for whatever reason, it doesn't work out. Who might the Giants go for? I'm going to give you a couple names that I like. Mike McDaniel, former Dolphins head coach. Davis Webb, who is the quarterback's coach and pass game coordinator for the Broncos. That's a name I really like. And who knows? Would Harbaugh maybe in that instance consider keeping Mike Kafka and or Tim Kelly for the role? I don't think so. I don't think that would be the case. I would think Kafka would probably want to move on to another, team. But the advantage there is that those are the guys who work with Jackson Dart, and it would allow them to keep continuity. All right. Now, I am intrigued by Davis Webb as a possibility. Davis Webb, a former Giants quarterback, a bright young mind. Now, he's never been an offensive coordinator. So would that work against him? If for a team that's looking to hit the ground running and turn things around and get back to the playoffs, it could. But you know what? Like I always say, you got to start somewhere. Some of the greatest head coaches, entered their first season as unknowns and whether they would work out as head coaches. And you could say the same thing for coordinators. Some of the best coordinators in the game on both sides of the ball, they come in and it's their, they had to start somewhere. So I would not be against Davis Webb possibly being, considered if things don't work out with Todd Monken. Now, I feel the same way for defensive coordinator. Defensive coordinator, that's a little harder to handicap at this point. But a guy I'm really intrigued with is Jim Leonhard. All right, Jim Leonhard was a former safety, I believe he played for the Broncos back in the day. The only defensive coordinator experience he had was with the Wisconsin Badgers. And during his time in Wisconsin, let's see, he had Wisconsin was like in the top 10 defenses in that division in scoring and total defense. The school also recorded 51 sacks in 2019, which at the time was a school record. And their 2021 defense gave up an average of 239.1 yards to opponents per game, which was the best record since 1954. All right. So Jim Leonhard intrigues me. Now for special teams, this is a guy who I know Harbaugh knows for a bit. He was on his staff last year. Chris Horton, who is also another former NFL player. Chris Horton was a safety with Washington from 2008 to 2010. And he also was a big special teamer for Washington back then. The Ravens special teams have historically, at least recently, been very, very good, ranking in the top 10 league-wide. All right, so Horton's accomplishments. Since 2019, Baltimore has been in the top 10 in punt return yards, in punt returns of 20-plus yards, opponent kickoff return average, and kickoff return touchdowns. Now, Davis Webb, Jim Leonhard, Chris Horton, what do they all have in common? They're all former players. I have always been of the opinion that if you can get a former player to come in and be a coach, that gives you an advantage because those guys have played the game before. They have been on the front line, so to speak, and they tend to be a little bit more creative, I think, than somebody who, comes in and has never, ever played the game before, but just studied it and worked their way, into a play caller or whatever. So those are the three that I would have on my wish list. I know a lot of you have asked me in the past, who's on your wish list? Those will be my three. Now, again, I do think it's going to be Todd Monken, assuming he doesn't, get the head coaching job at Cleveland, which I'd be surprised if he does. I don't know that he's going to take the Tampa Bay job. It would make more sense for him to go with Harbaugh, but you never know. You never know how these things are going to go. But if given my druthers, those are the three I would want: Davis Webb, Jim Leonhard, Chris Horton. So we'll find out in the coming days. John Harbaugh's got a lot of work to do. As I've mentioned before, when it comes to coordinators, they do have to satisfy the Rooney Rule because that rule was expanded to include coordinators. I think the Giants will do so very quickly. And I would say maybe in another week or so, we should start to hear leaks about who they have as far as their coordinators go, with a final announcement of all the coaching staff, including the position coaches who, again, are going to meet with Harbaugh this week on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to find out where they stand and if they want to come back. Uh, we should find that out, I would think, maybe by the first week of February, the latest. So the coaching is going to be key. And oh, by the way, I expect Harbaugh to put together a big staff. He had a big staff down in Baltimore, which, as I've mentioned before, allowed individuals to focus on one nuance of the football operations as opposed to having to juggle multiple assignments. And you know what? It worked for him down in Baltimore. I suspect that's what's going to happen here with the Giants. One of the reasons why, Harbaugh wanted assurance that he would be able to build his staff up the way he wanted to and not have any restrictions on the number of assistants or the amount of money spent or anything like that. So exciting times for Giant fans right now as we wait to see what the next steps are under John Harbaugh. And folks, we will have everything for you. Again, don't forget, on Tuesday, we have John Harbaugh's introductory press conference, and I will have a show for you just as soon as humanly possible. I'll try and do a few shorts for you over on the YouTube channel as well, just so you're not left with nothing. And of course, check out my written work over on New York Giants on SI because I will have stuff over there. So that being said, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast, and we will see you again tomorrow.